Hello, Charlie here. I thought we'd get started by discussing the material in Chapter 1, just a quick overview, give you kind of background about what's in there and why. And I'll leave the reading up to you. There is a fairly heavy reading schedule in this class. You'll probably budget 3-4 hours a week on reading, and there's a couple of ways that students approach this material. Some of it's fairly technical, and so it's kind of difficult to sit down and really breeze through. So one of the strategies you might find effective for you, although everyone's different, is to maybe look through the chapter quickly. Look at the introductory section, and then maybe flip through and look at the topics, and then read the conclusion. And sometimes even students will start looking at some of the problems. Some of the first exercises, review questions give you kind of the big picture, and then go back and do a careful reading, or do careful readings as you answer the questions, and that tends to reinforce the material. So anyway, what is accounting? Accounting is the language of business, as many of you have probably heard, and it's important for every organization, not just businesses, but not-for-profits, federal agencies, state agencies, to be able to collect accounting information and use it to better manage the financial aspects of a business. So not everything is quantifiable in numbers, but you can't ignore the numbers. In other words, it's one measure of performance, it's not the only one. So anyway, accounting is a process of identifying transactions, and typically in a perfect world, we have these economic activities, these exchanges that go on, promises, commitments, actual exchanges, and then for goods and services, and sometimes there's payment that occurs later. And these are all economic phenomena, the wearing out of equipment, the using up of materials, and accounting tries to capture that economic activity and organize it into a set of accounts so it can be communicated to decision makers, both inside the business or organization and outside. Usually outside stakeholders are the owners or creditors or employees, and they want to know how the organization is doing. And then, of course, the inside stakeholders, management and employees tasked with particular activities, are looking at that information so that they can get insights into how to make decisions, or how well decisions are being made, and how the processes that are underlying the business, the creating wealth or the delivery of services, is being run and run efficiently. Okay, so that's really kind of the big picture there. It's a language of business. And the book talks about all the different users and how they have different accounting, or accounting adapts to those different users. But you have the insiders, management, the investors and creditors, employees, and then there's some regulatory oversight for almost every business, and multiple regulatory agencies for many businesses. And they would also use some of that accounting information. And so they give an overview of what financial accounting is, and it's really preparing financial statements for external users primarily, so that they can look and see how their investments or how the business is running. Will they get their loans repaid? Will the bills be paid if they've extended credit, trade type credit? And it's based on historical numbers. There's some important concepts in this chapter that you want to be sure to master. They talk about managerial or cost accounting. We're going to cover this like the last third of these 10 chapters, and it's important for you guys because as emergency responders, administrators, the internal workings, so the delivery of services and some of the budgeting aspects are going to be important, and that's typically covered on this managerial or cost accounting. Okay, and it has a different focus, so it's different than financial accounting, and we'll see that later in application. And they talk about auditing, and many people think of IRS when they hear audit, but actually auditing is a well-defined profession. It occurs by external CPAs do audits, and that's really one of their big service lines. And then there's most large organizations and government agencies have their own internal audit. All right, and these guys are actually your friends; they're not your enemies. And the author talks about, or the authors talk about, how this is performed, and really for it to be valuable, the auditor needs to be independent or objective. In other words, you're not going to be reviewing or commenting on decisions that you've made, so you have to be distant from those. Then they talk about governmental or not-for-profit accounting, and again, I mentioned in the introduction to the course that we're going to spend a couple of weeks looking at this area, because as administrators for first responders and other emergency services, you're going to probably be in a local or state government organization or not-for-profit, and you're going to need to know these differences, and they can be substantial. Okay, and they talk about the history of accounting and how it evolved from kind of simple tallying to more comprehensive and complicated things. Most of the accounting that we know today emerged in the 1900s, typically around the 1920s, when there was a strong interest by the general public in the stock markets, capital markets, and of course after the crash of '29, regulatory agencies were created, like the SEC, and we've seen a number of crises that led to additional regulation. But it talks about that evolution, and it's important to have a little background on that and figure out the culmination of this material is they talk about the why we have standards, and who makes those. So we have these rules that we have to follow in accounting, and it's really for the financial accounting aspect, so that everybody measures transactions similarly and reports them similarly for comparability. Okay, and then their last big regulatory action was SOX, and I put this in here because, and I think it's important in the chapter just to have an understanding, because you hear about it in the business literature a lot, but SOX was like the last big regulatory action, and it arose because of Enron and a couple of other visible corporate failures, and it fundamentally changed the accounting auditing profession, and also imposed a real strict kind of reporting system on public companies. And public companies are defined as companies that have stock or debt that's sold to the public. Okay. Okay, and then they talk about the Financial Accounting Standards Board, and they're the primary rule maker for public or private companies. The government, SEC, has the final word on for public companies, the stock exchange companies, and then governmental accounting standards are set by the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. And like I said, when we talk about governmental accounting, that's one of the things we'll highlight on. And we don't have to worry about international standards. Ethics are fundamental to accounting, and also to you guys as public administrators. It's important that you have the trust of not only your staff and other people within the organization that rely on your work, but also on the people you serve, and that you're avoiding conflicts of interest, and you're using public funds the way they should be used and expended. And so they talk about the importance of ethics in the accounting profession, and then it's a core value. It's fundamental to accountants being able to prepare their job. Okay, and that's really the big part of this chapter, is just to give you an overview of what financial statements are and some of the key concepts and assumptions behind there. And we'll revisit these later in the next chapter. So this is just kind of a brief overview and introduction. So it seems like a lot to take on, and it is because of the breadth of it, but they don't really talk about it in considerable depth. And I think if you look at the review problems, spend a little time on those, you'll master this material fairly quickly. And again, it covers a wide range of topics, but not a lot of depth. Okay.